The gilt-edged wedding invitation sat on my kitchen table like a beautifully wrapped insult. My sister Victoria's elegant script highlighted every detail of her perfect day, right down to the note specifying no handmade gifts. It had been 5 years since Dad disappeared, leaving only a letter saying he had to protect his legacy. Victoria had written him off as a failed businessman who abandoned us. I knew better. "Are you really going?" my best friend Amy asked, examining the invitation. After everything Victoria did. By everything, she meant Victoria stealing my college fund, claiming Dad had given it to her before he vanished. She meant Victoria spreading rumors that I was adopted because I looked nothing like our family's superior genes. She meant 5 years of social media posts mocking my poor life choices of becoming a kindergarten teacher instead of joining her in the corporate world. "I have to go," I said quietly, wrapping the gift I'd spent 6 months making. A hand-carved wooden jewelry box with a hidden compartment. "He's watching." Amy raised an eyebrow. "Your dad?" "Emma, he's been gone for 5 years." If only she knew. The careful instructions he'd left, the cryptic messages delivered through his old lawyer, the tasks he'd set for both his daughters while he worked in secret to protect everything he'd built. Victoria's wedding to James Wellington Aya was the social event of the season. Old money marrying new ambition. At least that's how the society pages painted it. What they didn't report was how James's company, Wellington Technologies, had been quietly buying up shares of Dad's old company through shell corporations. The wedding day arrived bright and perfect, just like Victoria. I walked into the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom, my simple blue dress a stark contrast to the designer gowns surrounding me. "Emma," Victoria's voice dripped fake sweetness. "You actually came. And, oh, you brought a gift." She held my carefully wrapped present like it might contaminate her designer wedding dress. "It's a jewelry box," I started to explain. "I carved it myself." "Of course you did," she cut me off. "Because you can't afford a real gift. Just like you can't afford a proper dress for my wedding." She dropped the box onto a nearby table, not even bothering to open it. "Victoria." I tried again. "You need to know something about Dad." "Don't," she snapped, her mask slipping. "Don't you dare mention that coward today. He abandoned us, Emma. Left us with nothing but debt and broken promises. Well, look at me now, marrying into real wealth, real power. What do you have? A teaching job and handmade crafts." That's when James appeared, his corporate smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Darling, it's time. The shareholders are waiting." "Shareholders?" I asked innocently, though I knew exactly what was happening. "Wellington Technologies is announcing a major acquisition today," Victoria preened. "James's company is finally taking over that worthless tech firm Dad lost. Poetic justice, don't you think?" As they walked away, my phone buzzed with a message from Dad's lawyer. "It's time. The real shareholders are here." I touched the simple pendant around my neck, the key to everything Dad had planned. Victoria had no idea that her perfect wedding day was about to turn into something very different. The ballroom's crystal chandeliers sparkled as James took the stage, Victoria beaming at his side. 300 of New York's elite waited expectantly for the big announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," James began, "today isn't just a celebration of love. It's a celebration of business triumph. Wellington Technologies is proud to announce our acquisition of Chen Innovations." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Victoria's smile grew even wider as James continued. "This acquisition represents the final chapter of the Chen family's legacy. A legacy of failure that ends today as we transform their outdated company into something worthy of the Wellington name." I felt my hand tighten around my champagne glass. If only they knew that Dad's outdated company had secretly developed quantum computing technology that made Wellington's systems look like pocket calculators. And now James raised his glass, a toast to my beautiful bride, who helped make this acquisition possible by providing inside information about her father's company. The crowd chuckled appreciatively. Victoria practically glowed with pride at publicly admitting her betrayal of Dad's trust. That's when the ballroom doors swung open. Mr. Patterson, Dad's elderly lawyer, walked in flanked by a team of serious-looking executives. In his hands was my wooden jewelry box, the wedding gift Victoria had discarded. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. But I believe there's been a mistake about who's acquiring whom. Victoria's smile froze. What are you talking about? The key, Miss Emma, Mr. Patterson said to me. It's time. With trembling fingers, I removed my necklace and approached the wooden box. The pendant fit perfectly into a hidden lock I'd carved into the bottom. Inside wasn't jewelry. Instead, there were documents, ownership certificates, patents, and most importantly, proof that Victoria had been selling company secrets to Wellington Technologies. What is this? James demanded, stepping down from the stage. Evidence, Mr. Patterson replied calmly, of corporate espionage, insider trading, and attempted theft of proprietary technology, all documented in Miss Emma's handmade gift, which neither of you bothered to examine carefully. Victoria laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. Emma's just a teacher. She doesn't know anything about business. Doesn't she? Mr. Patterson raised an eyebrow. Then perhaps you'd like to explain these? He began displaying documents on the ballroom's giant screens. Years of secret correspondence between Victoria and Wellington Technologies, planning the hostile takeover of Chen Innovations. But as Victoria's perfect day began crumbling around her, I noticed something strange in James's expression. He didn't look shocked by the revelations. He looked, pleased. Actually, he said smoothly, we were counting on this. He pulled out his phone and pressed a single button. Suddenly, every exit in the ballroom sealed shut with heavy security doors. Did you really think, he smiled coldly, that we wouldn't have a backup plan? That's when I realized this wasn't just about acquiring Dad's company. There was something much darker going on. You see, James continued, pulling Victoria possessively to his side. We knew your father was still alive. We knew he was watching. This wedding, the acquisition announcement, it was all bait to draw him out. Victoria's perfectly made-up face showed genuine shock. What? James, what are you talking about? Oh, darling, he patted her cheek condescendingly. Did you really think I married you for love? You were useful, feeding us information about your father's company. But the real prize was always the quantum computing technology. Mr. Patterson stepped forward. The technology you'll never get your hands on. James laughed. Won't I? Right now, my teams are raiding every Chin Innovations facility worldwide. The security codes Victoria so helpfully provided give us access to everything. Those codes expired years ago, I said quietly. What? The codes Victoria sold you. Dad changed them the day he disappeared. She's been feeding you useless information for 5 years. James's corporate smile finally cracked. Impossible. Our hackers confirmed. Confirmed what they were meant to find, came a new voice from the back of the ballroom. Really, James, did you think I wouldn't protect my daughters, even from themselves? The crowd parted like water to reveal a man I hadn't seen in 5 years. Dad looked older, grayer, but his eyes still held that familiar intelligent spark. Daddy? Victoria whispered. But James was already barking orders into his phone. Execute Protocol Omega. Wipe everything. Screens around the ballroom lit up showing Chen Innovations facilities worldwide. But instead of the chaos James expected, each location showed business as usual. Looking for your strike teams? Dad asked mildly. I'm afraid they're all having coffee with federal agents right now. Excellent coffee, actually, from the cafe where my youngest daughter worked part-time while secretly overseeing our global security protocols. I smiled, remembering all those early mornings making lattes while monitoring the company's quantum encryption network through my ordinary laptop. James pulled out a gun. This isn't over. The quantum computing patents alone are worth billions. Victoria, tell them. Tell them where the backup servers are. But Victoria stood frozen, finally understanding how completely she'd been played. That's when the wooden jewelry box began to hum. The wooden jewelry box wasn't just a box. It was a quantum processor disguised as a wedding gift. As it hummed to life, holograms filled the ballroom, showing every secret meeting between James and his real employers. You weren't working for Wellington Technologies at all, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. You work for the Chen family's oldest rivals, the Harrison Group. James's face contorted with rage. How did you? The coffee shop, Dad explained proudly. Emma didn't just serve coffee to your teams, she served it to your boss, Richard Harrison himself. Every morning, discussing his plans right in front of the simple barista he never really saw. Victoria sank into a nearby chair, her wedding dress pulling around her. All this time, you were just using me. Of course he was, I said gently, just like the Harrison Group used Dad's former partner 20 years ago. That's why Dad disappeared. To protect us from what happened to Uncle Robert's family. Uncle Robert? Victoria's voice trembled. You said he died in an accident. An accident arranged by the Harrison Group when he refused to steal Dad's research. I finished. That's why Dad left. Not because he failed, but because he was protecting us while he gathered evidence. James raised his gun higher. Enough. The servers don't exist. Dad interrupted. The quantum technology was never in servers. It's been hidden in plain sight, in handmade wooden boxes, children's toys, ordinary objects my talented daughter has been crafting for years. The holograms shifted to show my kindergarten classroom, where every handmade decoration concealed part of the quantum network. My students' art projects, my coffee shop's handmade signs, all pieces of the most advanced computing system ever built. You see, I explained, Dad taught me more than just woodworking. While Victoria was selling outdated secrets, I was building something revolutionary, something that could never be stolen because it exists everywhere and nowhere at once. Federal agents emerged from among the wedding guests. James looked frantically for escape routes, but found none. Victoria, he said desperately, tell them they're lying. You've seen the company files. The only files I saw, Victoria said slowly, were the ones you showed me. The ones you used to convince me to betray my family. She stood up, tears streaking her perfect makeup. I thought I was proving I was smarter than Emma, but I was just being a fool. As agents moved to arrest James, Dad approached Victoria. I'm sorry I had to disappear, but I needed to know which daughter would choose truth over power, love over money. The real company, I added softly, was never about technology. It was about Dad's legacy, teaching us that true value isn't in what you own, but in what you create and protect. 1 year later, Chen Innovations emerged from the shadows, revolutionizing quantum computing. Victoria serves as our charitable foundation's director, using her social skills to help others instead of harming them. James and the Harrison Group faced justice for decades of corporate terrorism. The wooden jewelry box sits in our company museum, next to a simple coffee cup and a kindergarten art project, reminders that sometimes the most powerful things come in the simplest packages. And every morning, I still make coffee for our employees. Now in our own building's cafe. Because as Dad always says, the best way to protect something valuable is to love it enough to serve it. Victoria and I are finally real sisters, our bond stronger for having been tested. She still attends society events, but now she proudly shows off my handmade gifts, each one possibly containing revolutionary technology or maybe just love. Nobody knows for sure, and that's exactly how we like it. I sat at the elegant dining table in my parents' home, watching my sister Diana hold court like she always did. Her wine glass waved dangerously as she gestured, telling yet another story about her latest business triumph. The acquisition was worth $50 million, she announced, preening under our parents' adoring gazes. Sterling Tech is now the fastest-growing software company in the state. My name is Meera Patel, and I've spent the last 5 years being the family disappointment. At least that's what they think I am. And what about you, Meera? Diana turned her attention to me, lips curving in that familiar condescending smile. Still working on that little startup of yours? What was it called again? Shadow something. Shadowbox Digital. I replied quietly, taking a sip of water. No wine for me tonight. I need a clear head for tomorrow's meetings. Right, right. Diana waved her hand dismissively. Doing websites for small businesses, isn't it? How? Quaint. Our mother jumped in, ever the peacekeeper. Not everyone can run a company like Sterling Tech, dear. Meera is doing her best with what she has. If they only knew what Shadowbox Digital really was. Behind the modest website and small downtown office that my family occasionally drove past, my tiny startup was actually one of the most innovative cybersecurity firms in the country. Our client list included government agencies, multinational corporations, and yes, several companies larger than Sterling Tech. But Diana had always been the star. Perfect grades, prestigious MBA, meteoric rise through the tech industry. When she founded Sterling Tech 6 years ago, our parents remortgaged their house to provide her seed funding. They never even asked what I was working on. I read about Sterling's new security platform, our father said proudly. Absolutely revolutionary. Diana, you're changing the entire industry. I bit back a smile, thinking about the security flaws our team had discovered in Sterling's platform just last week. Diana had dismissed our private warning sent through intermediaries, of course. Some tiny consulting firm couldn't possibly understand her sophisticated technology. Speaking of changing the industry, Diana continued, we're announcing a major merger tomorrow. One of the biggest deals in the state's history. She smiled smugly in my direction. But I'm sure you understand the importance of confidentiality agreements, Mira. Oh wait, your little web design company probably doesn't deal with those. My phone buzzed quietly in my lap. A message from my COO. Everything's set for tomorrow. Their board has approved the terms. Should I send the final paperwork to their lawyers? What was that, dear? My mother asked, noticing my distraction. Just a client emergency, I said. Small business websites, you know how it is. Diana laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Oh, I remember those days. Staying up late, worrying about tiny projects. But that's the difference between us, isn't it? I always aimed higher. I typed a quick response. Send everything. Meeting at 9 a.m. The truth about Shadowbox Digital was known to very few people. On paper, we were a small web development firm. In reality, we were a cybersecurity powerhouse operating through a complex network of shell companies and subsidiaries. Our real headquarters occupied 3 floors of a downtown high-rise, employing over 200 of the best programmers and security experts in the business. More importantly, we had spent the last year quietly acquiring shares in Sterling Tech through various front companies. Diana's revolutionary security platform was built on fundamental flaws that would soon become very public. Her company's value was about to plummet unless someone stepped in to save it. That someone was Shadowbox Digital. Another glass, Diana? Our mother offered, reaching for the wine bottle. Why not? Diana beamed. We should celebrate success when we see it. Speaking of which, Mira, if you ever want some advice on growing your business, I'd be happy to help. Sterling's smallest division probably handles more money than your entire company. I checked my phone again. Our latest valuation had just come in, $2.3 billion. Sterling Tech's entire market cap was less than half that. That's kind of you, I said mildly. Actually, I do have some meetings about expansion tomorrow. Oh. Diana's eyebrows rose with exaggerated interest. Finally moving to a bigger office, maybe hiring a second employee? Our father chuckled. Now, Diana, be nice. Not everyone can be as successful as you. I thought about the stack of documents waiting in my real office, merger agreements, board approvals, and most satisfyingly, the papers that would make me Diana's boss. By this time tomorrow, Sterling Tech would be a subsidiary of Shadowbox Digital. You're right, I said, standing up. I should probably get home. Big day tomorrow. Diana raised her glass in a mock toast to small victories and modest ambitions. As I drove home, I thought about the moment 5 years ago when I decided to keep Shadowbox's true nature a secret from my family. It was at another dinner, just after Diana had launched Sterling Tech. She had spent the entire evening talking about her vision, her brilliance, her destiny to dominate the industry. I had tried to discuss my own plans for an innovative approach to cybersecurity. Diana had cut me off mid-sentence. Oh honey, she'd said, patting my hand. Security tech is so complex. Why don't you stick to something simple, like building websites? Know your limitations. So I did exactly what she suggested. On the surface, I created a small web development firm as Shadowbox's public face. I took an office in a modest building, hired a few local developers to maintain the facade, and behind the scenes, I built something far bigger than Diana could imagine. My phone buzzed again as I pulled into my garage. Another message from my COO. Final confirmation from their board. They have no idea who's really buying them. You should see their org chart for the merged company. They have you listed as reporting to Diana. I smiled, thinking of tomorrow's meeting. Diana's face when she realized that her tiny startup sister was about to become her boss would be priceless. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's letting them think they're right until the perfect moment to show them just how wrong they've been. The next morning, I stood in my real office, 40 floors above the city. The small web design office my family knew about was visible from here. a perfect metaphor for how they had always underestimated me. Ready? My COO, James, appeared at my door. Sterling's executive team just arrived. They're in the main conference room. I smoothed my designer suit, a far cry from the casual attire I wore to family dinners. Is Diana here yet? Just walked in. You should see her face trying to figure out why the merger meeting is being held at a company she's never heard of. I smiled, picking up my tablet. The last 5 years had been building to this moment. When I entered the conference room, Diana was standing at the window, her back to the door. She turned, recognition and confusion flooding her face. Mira, what are you doing here? This is a private meeting. I walked to the head of the table, setting down my tablet. Actually, I called this meeting. Deanna laughed, but it sounded forced. Don't be ridiculous. I'm here to meet with the CEO of Atlas Dynamics. Atlas Dynamics was one of Shadowbox's many shell companies, the one we used to negotiate the merger. Atlas Dynamics is a subsidiary of Shadowbox Digital, I said calmly, nodding to James to start the presentation. My company. The room fell silent. Diana's face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror. That's impossible, she finally managed. Shadowbox is a tiny web design company. You build websites for restaurants. That's our public face, I agreed. But perhaps you should have looked more closely at who's been acquiring Sterling Tech shares over the past year, or who sent you that security audit warning last month, the one you dismissed because it came from a tiny consulting firm. Diana's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the polished floor. No. I clicked through to the first slide, displaying Shadowbox's true organizational structure. Shadowbox Digital is the parent company of 7 technology firms, including Atlas Dynamics. We specialize in advanced cybersecurity solutions, with a current market valuation of $2.3 billion. The Sterling Tech board members were shuffling through their papers, whispering among themselves. Diana remained frozen, staring at the org chart. As of this morning, I continued, we own 51% of Sterling Tech's shares. This meeting isn't to negotiate a merger, it's to announce one. You can't do this, Diana whispered. Actually, I can. Your board has already approved the deal. They were quite eager to accept our offer, especially after we demonstrated the critical security flaws in your new platform. Diana's face flushed red. Those warnings came from you? We tried to tell you privately. You chose not to listen. I turned to address the broader room. Sterling Tech will become a division of Shadowbox Digital. We'll fix the security issues, integrate the salvageable technology, and restructure the management team. Restructure. Diana's voice cracked. I'm the CEO. Not anymore. I slid a document across the table. Your resignation letter is already prepared. Don't worry, your golden parachute is quite generous. The next hour was a blur of signatures, legal requirements, and shocked silence. Diana sat in her chair, seemingly unable to process what was happening. Finally, as the board members filed out, she turned to me. Why, she asked. Why go to all this trouble? Why pretend to be small? I sat on the edge of the conference table. Do you remember 5 years ago when you told me to know my limitations? You, Mom, Dad, you all decided what I was capable of without ever bothering to find out what I was actually doing. So this is revenge? No, I corrected her. This is business. Sterling Tech is a good acquisition for us, despite its flaws. The fact that it happens to be deeply satisfying is just a bonus. My phone buzzed. A message from our mother. Diana just called in tears. What's going on? What have you done? I showed the message to Diana. They still think you're the successful one. Should we go tell them together? The family dinner that night was very different from the previous one. I sat at the same table, but now Diana was the quiet one, pushing food around her plate. I don't understand, our father kept saying. How could Shadowbox be worth billions? You work in that tiny office downtown. That's just for local web design clients, I explained. Our real headquarters is the Hamilton Tower. You can see my office from here. Top 10 floors, north side. Our mother reached for her wine glass with trembling hands. But Diana, Sterling Tech, will be well taken care of as part of Shadowbox, I assured her. Though Diana has chosen to step down as CEO. Stepping down is a polite way to put it, Diana muttered. You could have warned us, our father said accusingly. All these years pretending to run a small business. I raised an eyebrow. Would you have believed me? You never bothered to ask about my work, except to compare it unfavorably to Diana's. The silence that followed was heavy with realization. Years of assumptions, dismissals, and condescension hung in the air between us. Finally, Diana spoke. I underestimated you. We all did. Yes, I agreed. You did. In the months that followed, Sterling Tech was integrated into Shadowbox. The security flaws were fixed, the technology improved, and the company flourished under new management. Diana took a job with a smaller tech firm, hopefully having learned something about humility. Our parents stopped comparing us, though they still struggled to understand how their underachieving daughter built a billion-dollar company right under their noses. As for me, I kept the small web design office downtown. It serves as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the best success is the kind no one sees coming. Occasionally, I drive past it on my way to my real office, remembering Diana's words. Such a tiny startup. I smile every time, because sometimes the best response to being underestimated isn't to prove people wrong. It's to let them keep believing they're right until the perfect moment to show them just how wrong they've been. These days, when people ask about my path to success, I tell them the truth. Sometimes the biggest achievements start with a small facade and a lot of patience. And sometimes the sweetest victory isn't in proving others wrong, but in watching them realize how wrong they've been all along.
Growing up in the shadow of success is never easy, especially when your family measures worth by the size of your office and the numbers in your bank account. I'm Anna Mitchell, and for the past decade I've been the family's favorite cautionary tale. It all started when I chose to leave my cushy corporate job at Anderson and Mitchell Corp. Yes, that Mitchell, my father's company, to start my own consulting business. To say my family was less than supportive would be an understatement. "You're throwing away a perfectly good career," my father had said, his disappointment evident in every syllable. "Vice president at 25 and you want to become what? A freelancer." But I had seen enough from my years inside the corporate machine. While my cousins James and Victoria climbed the corporate ladder at various Fortune 500 companies, I noticed something they didn't. The real power wasn't in the corner offices. It was in the shadows, in the consulting firms that actually ran these corporations from behind the scenes. So I started small, working from my tiny apartment, taking any client who would give me a chance. 4 years I operated under various business names, building a network of shell companies that all led back to one entity: Phoenix Consulting Group. Nobody knew I owned it, I made sure of that. As far as the business world was concerned, Phoenix was run by a mysterious board of directors who never showed their faces. The truth? It was just me orchestrating everything from the background. Today marked our annual family reunion, a tradition that had become increasingly painful over the years. As usual, it was being held at my Aunt Margaret's sprawling estate in the Hamptons, where success was measured in square footage and luxury cars. "Anna, darling." Aunt Margaret's voice dripped with false sweetness as I arrived. "Still doing that, what do you call it, freelance thing?" I smiled politely, clutching my modest handbag Gucci, but last season's model. Not that they needed to know it contained contracts worth millions. "Consulting, Aunt Margaret." "Yes, I'm still consulting." My cousin James, now CFO of a tech company, snickered from behind his champagne glass. "Consulting? Is that what we're calling it now? Last I heard you were working out of a WeWork space." He wasn't wrong. I did have an office at WeWork, one of many decoys I maintained to keep my real operation hidden. Victoria, my other cousin, joined in. She was wearing a power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Poor Anna, still a nobody after 10 years. While we're all executives, she's just a random consultant. "What a disappointment," Aunt Margaret added, shaking her head. "Your father had such high hopes for you." I took a sip of champagne, hiding my smile. If they only knew that tomorrow at their company's biggest deal signing, they'd learn who really runs Phoenix Consulting Group. You see, James's tech company had been struggling lately. They needed a major restructuring consultation, and they'd hired the best in the business, Phoenix Consulting Group. What they didn't know was that every recommendation, every strategy document, every proposal they'd received had come from me. Tomorrow they would be signing a $50 million contract that would give Phoenix complete control over their restructuring process. And the best part? The contract required the presence of Phoenix's CEO for the final signing. As I watched my family brag about their achievements and mock my choices, I couldn't help but think about tomorrow. About the moment when they'd realize that the nobody they'd been ridiculing was actually the person holding their company's future in her hands. My phone buzzed, a message from my executive assistant. Final contract revisions complete. Everything ready for tomorrow's signing ceremony. I typed back a quick perfect, and returned to listening to my family's condescension. Let them have their moment. Tomorrow would be mine. The next morning, I dressed with particular care in my custom-made Chanel suit. Not the flashy kind my cousins favored, but a subtle, deadly elegant black ensemble that whispered old money. My Louboutins clicked against the marble floor of Phoenix Consulting Group's real headquarters. A sleek, understated office in a historic building downtown, not the WeWork space my family thought I worked from. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," my executive assistant Sarah greeted me. "The team is ready for the signing ceremony at Mitchell Tech. Legal has triple-checked the contracts." I smiled, remembering how James had bragged yesterday about Mitchell Tech's revolutionary turnaround plan, my plan, though he didn't know it yet. Any last-minute changes from their side? No, but... Sarah hesitated. "Your cousin James has been trying to negotiate better terms all morning. He's called 3 times demanding to speak with Phoenix's CEO. Has he now?" I picked up my briefcase containing the final contracts. Well, he'll get his wish soon enough. The signing ceremony was scheduled for 10 a.m. at Mitchell Tech's headquarters. As I pulled up in my understated Tesla, another detail that had earned mockery at family gatherings, why not a proper luxury car? I saw the usual crowd of executives entering the building. I took the private elevator to the top floor, my access card working flawlessly. I'd had it programmed months ago when we started this project. The conference room was already filling up with Mitchell Tech's board members and executives. James stood at the head of the table looking proud in his designer suit. Victoria sat beside him. She'd recently joined Mitchell Tech as their marketing director, another nepotistic appointment that made my blood boil. "Where is Phoenix's CEO?" James demanded as I walked in. "We're not signing anything until they show up." "The CEO will be here," I replied calmly, taking my seat. "And who invited you?" Victoria sneered. "This is an executive-level meeting, Anna. We don't need consultants here." Before I could respond, the door opened and Aunt Margaret swept in, followed by my father. Of course they were here. Aunt Margaret was on Mitchell Tech's board, and my father never missed a chance to oversee his family's business dealings. "Anna," my father said, surprise evident in his voice. "This is a private meeting." "Yes, it is," I agreed, standing up. "And it's about to begin." Right on cue, Sarah entered with a team of lawyers from Phoenix. The room fell silent as they distributed the final contracts. "But we can't start," James protested. "The CEO of Phoenix isn't even here yet." I walked to the head of the table opposite James. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent room, "the CEO of Phoenix Consulting Group is here." Victoria laughed. "Oh please, don't tell me you're trying to take credit for arranging this meeting? Know your place, Anna." I pulled out my business card. Not the consultant card they were familiar with, but my real one. The one that read, "Anna Mitchell, CEO and founder, Phoenix Consulting Group." "I am in my place," I said, sliding the card across the table. "Right where I've always been, running the company you've been desperately trying to impress for the past 6 months. The color drained from James's face as he picked up the card. What happened next would become family legend. The silence in the room was deafening. My father reached for my business card with trembling hands, examining it as if it might be counterfeit. This is impossible," James stammered. "Phoenix Consulting Group is a billion-dollar company. They've restructured Fortune 500 companies. Yes," I said calmly, opening my briefcase. "We have. And now, we're here to restructure Mitchell Tech unless, of course, you'd prefer to work with a different consulting firm." I paused, letting the implications sink in. "One that hasn't already spent 6 months analyzing your company's weaknesses?" Victoria jumped up. "This is a trick. She's lying." Sarah stepped forward, distributing folders to each board member. "Inside you'll find verification of Ms. Mitchell's position, including Phoenix's corporate registration documents, major client lists and press coverage from the past decade. You'll notice we've operated under strict confidentiality, which is why the CEO's identity has remained private until now. Aunt Margaret was frantically flipping through the documents. But the WeWork office? The small clients? The modest lifestyle? I smiled. Appearances can be deceiving, Aunt Margaret. Something you taught me, actually. Remember when you said, true power doesn't need to show off? Though I suspect you meant it differently. My father hadn't spoken yet. He was staring at the financial statements in his folder, particularly the line showing Phoenix's annual revenue. $8 billion, he whispered. My daughter built an $8 billion company. Now, I said, sitting down and opening the contract, shall we discuss the terms of Mitchell Tech's restructuring? The contract requires my signature after all. James collapsed into his chair. The recommendations, the strategies, they all came from you? Every single one, I confirmed, including the suggestion to replace the current CFO with someone more qualified. I met his eyes. Someone without a history of overlooking major financial risks. Victoria gasped. You're firing James? Phoenix Consulting Group is recommending new leadership, I corrected. Whether Mitchell Tech follows our recommendations is their choice. But our contract does give us final say on executive appointments during the restructuring period. You can't do this, Aunt Margaret protested. We're family. Exactly, I replied. And family should want what's best for the company, shouldn't they? Not just what's best for themselves. I turned to my father, who hadn't taken his eyes off the documents. Dad. He finally looked up, and I saw something I'd never seen before: respect. Pure, unqualified respect. All these years, he said quietly, while we were judging you, mocking you, you were building an empire. I learned from the best, I replied. You taught me about business. Aunt Margaret taught me about power. James and Victoria taught me what not to do. And I took those lessons and built something bigger than any of us. I picked up my pen. Now shall we sign? The markets are waiting for the announcement. One by one they signed. James looked defeated, Victoria furious, and Aunt Margaret shocked. But my father, he was smiling. After the signing, as the lawyers filed out and the board members dispersed, my father stayed behind. I was wrong, he said simply. We all were. Yes, you were, I agreed. But that's business. Sometimes we win, sometimes we learn. He laughed, actually laughed. When did you become so wise? Probably around the same time I became a disappointment, I said, but without bitterness. Success was the best revenge after all. That evening, as I sat in my real office, the entire top floor of a downtown building, I received dozens of messages from family members who'd heard the news. Aunt Margaret invited me to discuss opportunities. James wanted to explain his side. Victoria sent a lengthy apology. I left them all unread. Instead, I opened my laptop and began working on Mitchell Tech's restructuring plan. Because at the end of the day, I wasn't just their relative anymore. I was their CEO's boss. And I had an empire to run.